Super Mario 3D World was one of my favorite childhood games, so news of a port being brought to the Switch left me pretty excited. The Wii U didn't sell much anyway, so not many people ever got the chance to play the original, so it makes sense from a business standpoint. But I've learned not to get my hopes too high with Nintendo's concerningly large amount of ports. Sometimes they add some small extra content, like in Pikmin 3. Other times, there are bundles, like with 3D All-Stars. They're decent as is, but most often, they're sold for full price, and for a game that's already been out for likely years by the time, it leaves me and many others very hesitant to buy. But this game just pretty much had another game in the form of Bowser's Fury. After that initial reveal, it was safe to say my hopes were pretty high, and later trailers just inflated those hopes even more. You had the giant bell, playable Bowser Jr., and Bowser? Not to mention the fact that it was going to be a whole open world experience. They really gave this game the deluxe treatment. At this point, I was ready to try the new mode out and see if Bowser's Fury was actually fun. And then the game released. And then I didn't play for 3 years. I mean, can you even blame me? I wasn't really feeling the $60 price tag for a game I already have, just with a new mode. And then, fast forward 3 years later, I got the trailer recommended to me on my YouTube page and I was like, oh. So I begrudgingly shelled out the money to try it out. And what do I think about it? Well, you know, that's the point of the video. Obviously, I'm a little late to the party. 3 years, goddamn. But I just wanted to share my thoughts about it and possibly discuss what implications this game could have for Nintendo's future direction, you know, regarding the 3D Mario series. Anyway, let's start. My first impressions? The intro cutscene looked kinda cheap. And it's really weird too, because like the rest of the game looks great, it's just in this one instance. Everything looks just so plasticky and fake. I don't know why. And stop! Stop right there. Look at that. Did you see that animation of the ink? It really pisses me off. I don't know why, it just looks so bad. I don't think I've ever seen anything in a Mario game look as bad as that animation before. But thankfully, we won't have to witness that eyesore of an animation much longer, because we eventually get transported to Lake Lapcat, and the graphics there are a lot better. I guess you can really tell where their priorities laid. The exposition it provides is pretty weak as well, but it's a Mario game, and Mario games aren't really known for being the pinnacle of storytelling, so I'll let it slide. I do like this beginning area though, because having you immediately be thrown into this menacing atmosphere, I mean at least as menacing as Nintendo can get, placing you headfirst into what this mode has to offer, it's pretty cool. And seeing Bowser, they did a good job of making him feel so grand. I like his design too, with the red and the black contrasting really well. If I had a nickel every time Bowser transformed into a more powerful version in Super Mario 3D World. But honestly, one thing I didn't realize from the trailers was just how big he was. The open world aspect really helps emphasize that too. He's not just an object in the background, but he's just there. Granted, the concept of Bowser being big isn't really new. If I had a nickel every time, but I'll take that over just regular Bowser any day. After collecting the first Catshine, which, by the way, has such an interesting design rather than just being a vague celestial body, Bowser retreats and you meet Bowser Jr., who explains the situation to you. Bowser has been taken over and made evil by some black goo, and it's up to Mario. Wait a minute. This is just the plot of Paper Mario Color Splash. Nintendo thinks they're so slick. Oh well. Junior asks Mario for his help and Mario just gives him this look. I mean, like, I know Junior has tried to kill Mario many times and whatever, but he's 4 or something? A toddler. Just a little guy. But eventually the two team up and you're off to explore Lake Lapcat and save Bowser. I mean, I'm pretty sure Bowser Jr. is only there to provide a co-op option, mostly because outside of that, he doesn't really do much. He just attacks enemies, paints walls for like some rewards, and like just stuff like that. But honestly, I was so excited for the co-op because one of my main reasons for loving Super Mario 3D World was the fact that I could play it with my friends and family when I was younger. And how is it? It sucks. Bowser Jr. doesn't get any control of the camera at all, and there's honestly not much he can do outside of the things I already mentioned. I mean, like, he can fly, which is still pretty fun for player 2, but it loses its luster after about 5 minutes or so. It's pretty disappointing, especially for a mode that's part of a game that so heavily emphasizes the co-op aspect, But whatever, we'll see if the rest of the mode can redeem itself. But eventually, the two team up and you're off to explore the Lake Lapcat, yada yada yada, which leads us to one of the main appeals of this mode, the open world. This is an open world game, but that doesn't mean you get complete freedom. You still have to defeat Bowser and therefore collect a certain amount of cat shines to unlock the next areas, and the water also acts as a barrier that makes each area feel pretty distinct in terms of their specific zones. As for the areas themselves, yeah, I like them. The lakeside areas were what you'd expect from the first area, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of fun concepts, especially the propeller boxes. Love the propeller boxes. The ruins area is definitely a step up though, and I'm glad they didn't fall into the trap of just making everything beachy and tropical for like each area. The icy theming does bring the thermodynamics of the Mario universe into question, but hey, I'm not complaining. I'll take snow areas in a video game any day. The invisible block portion of Trickety Towers did induce just a little bit of hair pulling, especially during the Bowser sections, but slipskating Slope and the arena were still pretty fun, even if Boom Boom and Pom Pom are still as weak as usual. Maybe they should try some of that black goo. Also, the composers were on something when they made the OST of Crisp Climb Castle, easily the best soundtrack in Bowser's Fury. The whole area in general is just one of my favorites. I mean, aside from the ice physics. The wastelands, they were definitely an area. I spent probably the least amount of time here, and honestly, I don't like it as much as the other areas, but it's still a good area, and I like the Roiling Roller Isle. Obviously though, I'm a bit biased because I'm not a huge fan of lava levels in general, so I could see others enjoying the area a lot more. Except for the blue coin challenge on Glass Pipe Tower, I'm certain that challenge is just awful. The whole world is just teeming with a bunch of stuff to see. I mean, granted, it's not like you're gonna have much trouble achieving 100% of the game, probably would just take you a couple of hours. But it's nice to see that they have a lot of additional stuff scattered around the world, like these cloud cannons here, and these weird flingy things over there, and shines that are just not a part of any of the towers. One of the best things about the world, however, is Bowser just looming there. Seeing him progress through the stages as he gets ready to pounce just adds so much to the experience. Especially when you're minding your own business and having fun, and then suddenly you look, and you realize that you forgot about the giant dude trying to kill you every so once in a while. Of course I have to mention the skybox as well. The snowy mountains in the background are just so nice, and they're better than just the color blue. I honestly don't have any major complaints within the setting and the world, and each area keeps the gameplay pretty fresh, and the ideas are distinct enough to the point you can tell there's been a lot of creativity put into it. Though, if I had to pick one thing I didn't like, it'd probably be that each area does somewhat feel like sort of disjointed and disconnected from each other, which in and of itself isn't such a big problem because they all share vaguely tropical ideas and, cats. I just think it's a necessary evil that comes with having unique themes across all the areas, which is still overall a good thing. However, a very important thing, or should I say dinosaur, or dolphin, or something, that suppresses this problem is Plessie. Yeah, she's just a massive quality of life improvement. For some reason, Nintendo actually made her speed insane to the point that traversal between islands is a breeze. And she can also go on land too and demolish enemies as well. She's just very convenient in general. Plessie is a good example of another thing that makes Bowser's Fury so strong. The gameplay. Bowser's Fury takes the smooth, albeit simplistic movement system from 3D World and kinda just drops it here with a couple of adjustments, and younger me's suspicions were correct. The movement does feel pretty great in an open world, at least more open than the levels of 3D World. Mario in general is just pretty fast, and I never really wish he would hurry up or go a little faster. Though the fact that the islands are still pretty small and not crazy open is probably a contributing factor. Mario in the water though is actually abysmal. Thank God Plessie is there, because what is he doing? His upper arm strength is non-existent and he's just so slow. He just like me for real. But of course, a Mario's movement is only as good as his camera, at least to me. And honestly, it's kind of slow. The camera was one of the most annoying things for me when playing, because it just took an hour and a half to adjust the camera, just so I can get a glorious 1080p view of my impending fiery death. And the fact that the camera's auto adjustment would just kick in when I didn't want it to, so the only thing I could see was Mario's red cap and his big ass nose sticking out wasn't that great either. But I admit I'm being a little nitpicky, cause for the most part, it was fine, like at least I had free range movement. Anyway, you use this wonderful feature and the others I previously mentioned to collect the cat shines, which light up these lighthouses and dispel the ambiguous dark goo preventing you from progressing and unlocking these Gigabells, which I'll get into later. Initially, I thought there were only 50 of these until I learned there's actually double that, so you can imagine my pleasant surprise. It's good that there's a decent amount of them because it adds more life into the game, and I'm never going to complain about more content. You find these shrines located around the distinct areas I mentioned earlier, which keeps each area relatively self-contained. This does make each area feel a little more linear and less open world, but honestly, I am a fan of this kind of segmented sort of idea, cause otherwise I just get lost as I'm not the brightest bulb in the lamp, or whatever the saying is, I don't remember. Though I am glad all the areas try something new for their shine challenges, from things like the propeller boxes, invisible blocks, and the blue coins. They still at least had a couple things that were new. The shines outside of these areas, like the cloud cannons mentioned before, this guy, and just other miscellaneous challenges are cool too. There's not much to say about them though. They do provide incentive to explore around, which is what an open world game should do. The challenges to get the shrines are pretty varied and I had fun with most of them. Of course, exploring in a Mario game wouldn't be the same without the power-ups. The game takes most of the power-ups from the base game, RIP Double Cherry, you will be missed, and drops them around the map for you to collect. Another nice thing is that you're allowed to keep around 5 of each power-up stored in your inventory, and the game is pretty generous with these power-ups, as there's a lot of blocks around. You get some from collecting 100 coins too. And the blocks holding the power-ups respawn pretty frequently, so I never really had a problem with maintaining a fair supply of what I needed. Except for the Tanuki Leaf. It's a lot more prevalent in the later game, which means they are pretty sparse when you're first starting out, which is a shame because they're one of the most useful power-ups here. That also reminds me, there is kind of a disparity between the power-ups in this game. The Boomerang Flower and the Fire Flower are almost trivial compared to the utility the Super Bell and Tanuki Leaf provide. And given the nature of this mode being an open world game, the mobility the latter two power-ups provide are almost always better than the damage the flowers give, especially since each enemy can be taken out with usually one hit or so. Honestly, I kinda just use the flowers as glorified super mushrooms, but no hate to Boomerang Flower, love those guys. It would have been cool to see some other power-ups here too though, ones that have more use besides damage, like just throwing an idea out there, like the Cloud Flower from Galaxy 2, or maybe the Hammer from Mario Maker. Would have been neat, and it could have opened up some new possibilities, but obviously they're not part of the base game, and I understand why the developers didn't decide to go do anything crazy with them. A guy can dream though. Anyway, the main gauge of progression is found in these Gigabells, which are used in combating my next talking point, Bowser. Bowser as a villain has been clocking in. There have been countless boss fights with him, all with mostly unique gimmicks, I said mostly, which makes it difficult to keep him fresh as a boss. Which is why I'm also definitely glad to say that he's great here. I mean, I'd be pretty surprised if he wasn't, because the game is literally called Bowser's Fury. So how it works is every once in a while, Bowser will emerge from his shell and alter the weather patterns to terrorize you for a bit. Just gonna come out and say it, these scenes are cool as hell. Having a massive monster obstructing your path as all you can do is escape is a neat concept. While it is cool and all, it's pretty understandable if you'd get kind of annoyed at these occurrences, seeing as you can't really control when they start, and they do tend to happen pretty often. And don't get me wrong, it did get kind of annoying for me at some points, but thankfully, the devs made it so that collecting a cat shine will immediately dispel the darkness and give you some breathing time before the next encounter. Considering how many of these are scattered around, it won't be a tall order to accomplish. One thing I do enjoy, however, is how the difficulty amps up after each big Bowser battle, which I'll discuss in a second. His attacks get more versatile and dangerous, which can lead to some pretty fun and challenging moments. You won't know true pain until you are a victim of ice physics when Bowser's out to grill you. The big Bowser battles I mentioned earlier are also pretty simple. So basically, he's big. And you have to fight fire with fire by using these Giga Bells mentioned earlier to grow in size and fight him head on in these cool sections that act as sort of interludes before you reach the final boss. The neat thing is that the Giga Bell isn't really necessary to defeat him, just to start the fight, because you can lose it and just be fine. Anyway, you can either swipe at Bowser, jump on him when he's vulnerable, or throw these rocks he summons at him, which is my personal favorite method. There's just something so cathartic about chucking boulders. Now, is it the most innovative gameplay? Not really, but is it cool? Hell yeah. Although simple, the novelty itself is pretty nice, and the grandiose feel of the fight with the pouring rain, loud ringing, and Bowser gets this an A on presentation. I would have liked a little more variety between each subsequent fight, but I'm pretty happy with what we got. So all these encounters eventually lead up to the final climax, the fight with, drumroll please, Big Bowser. Again. This is like the 16th time. Anyway, you use Plessie to avoid Bowser's attacks and bash into him to eventually defeat him, and I thought it sufficed enough for a conclusion. I mean, it's nothing to write home about, but Plessie's movements are pretty fun, which already makes the fight better, and the presentation is still stellar. But I don't feel like there's that much to cover, like yeah, a Bowser boss fight, haven't seen that one before. I did have a little bit of trouble with it at some points, so the added difficulty is nice, but this could also be a result of me just not being very good at video games. I would say, this game definitely does live up to the title, and Bowser does do a pretty good job providing the main conflict for us to experience. But that's about all I have to say on the topic, so I guess it's time to talk about my closing thoughts. I'm like the 50th person to point this out, but a lot of people, including me, considered the possibility that this could be some sort of demo for Nintendo to test out Mario in an open world setting. Many of the questions that I had about how this series could fare in a setting akin to like Breath of the Wild or something were answered here, like with the power-up system. Now that we're coming up on the 7th anniversary of Super Mario Odyssey, the next major 3D Mario game is probably just on the horizon, even if people have been saying that for almost 7 years at this point. Not to mention the Switch successor rumored to be coming soon, and possibly with it, an open world Mario game. I think everyone agrees that this was Nintendo's test run, and personally, I think they did a good job with it. I had fun with the time I spent, and I enjoyed roaming around and eventually defeating Bowser. However, I will admit there was something about this mode that just felt kind of missing. Don't get me wrong, it was like still pretty fun, but I never had that moment where I was like having the time of my life, and I felt like it stagnated after a while. This definitely stems from the scope of the mode, which I think is what it suffers from the most. Because it's just a small side mode, it doesn't get the same amount of attention as a major release would, and therefore it does feel a little lacking. And I mean, that's fine, it comes alongside another amazing game that I recommend, but I would be lying if I didn't want to see how this game could have turned out if it was a full-fledged game. I will say, it probably could have benefited from more features from 3D World, like a haunted ship that used those light blocks found in the ghost houses of 3D World would have been sick, or those cannon blocks used in some of the final world levels. There's just a lot of ideas from 3D World I wish to return sometime, and Bowser's Fury was a perfect opportunity, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Most of my problems with the game stem from what the game could have been, and not what the game actually is. Which is a good problem to have, because it means I think the game is still a worthwhile experience for what it is. Seeing as Nintendo may use this as their blueprint for future Mario games, it brings up the question, what do I think about an open world Mario game? It has me excited, but also just a little bit worried. The open world format is just generally a fun concept that typically holds a lot of content, so I don't think I'd ever decline this opportunity for the series. But the thing is, the Mario games have always been relatively simple. You make it to the end of a level, you collect an objective, often with the help of some external force, like a power-up, and then you beat the big boss at the end. It's a reliable formula, but I don't know how well it would translate into an open world experience. Whether there would be enough content and ideas to introduce to prevent a big world like that from just feeling barren? I guess we'll just have to see. But anyway, Bowser's Fury is definitely worth trying, especially if you haven't played Super Mario 3D World before, so I'd recommend checking it out. If I had to rate it, I'd probably give it about an 8 out of 10. I enjoyed my time with it, and I hope you did too. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments. Bye! Hey, this is me post-production, and I just wanted to add something. You know the 8 out of 10 score I gave the game? I'd probably make that a 6 out of 10, which seems kind of harsh, but the game really does suffer from stagnation after a while because it gets kind of formulaic, and that's mostly because of the scope of the mode, which I mentioned earlier. But yeah, I feel like 6 out of 10 was more accurate for me. But you know, if you like the game, that's good. If you didn't like it, that's okay too. Anyway, see ya.